So after our conversation today, I just kept turning around my experiences from this past year over and over again in my head. And like Anna, I think I fell into that kind of trap of not doing justice to talking about big issues in my curriculum, or not really serving it as well as I think it needs to be framed. Um, and I think part of it was because early on my cooperating teacher had kind of set up the classroom as that drop in the bucket, where it's like, oh, we should read a woman writing, so we'll look at Emily Dickinson, but not actually taking a bigger context. And I really started to struggle, um, and really found it difficult going about it that way, when I was teaching The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And the thing about the school I was placed at was it was not very diverse racially, socioeconomically, pretty much nothing. Um, I had one class of my 3 classes of juniors, with one class had 2 African American students in it. Um, so I ran into this really interesting issue when I was trying to provide some contextual background to the use of the N-word in Huck Finn, contextually, historically, about Mark Twain using the word and how the word has changed and has been reclaimed now. But I really tried to talk about these big issues. Um, but because this was right off the bat at the beginning of second semester, and they had a semester of that kind of drop in the bucket technique, I just I had a lot of trouble engaging my students, who are predominantly white, in a conversation about race and racism. And I got a lot of kids saying, like, Miss M, you're making a big deal out of nothing. Racism isn't an issue anymore. And I was kind of blown away by that, because it is an issue. It's something that still affects every one of our lives today, and I think it's a naive and optimistic. I don't know if optimistic is the right word, but it's a naive approach to thinking about historically where we've been and where we're going. So it was really difficult to have those conversations about why it was a big deal for Huck to be traveling down the Mississippi with a black man who was an escaped slave. Um, it was difficult to make them, or to try to provide them with diverse, with other voices, voices that aren't represented in the white dead guy canon of literature. And it got to the point where I didn't quite know how to best incorporate women's voices or minority voices into our study of American literature, because they didn't really seem that interested. And I think part of it has to do with how I framed it, and looking ahead to my curriculum next year, I have a lot of opportunities to really fleshing out some big essential questions and big ideas for the whole year that will trace throughout the different literature that we read, be it Long Way Gone, or Their Eyes Were Watching God, or Othello, all of these things that I know that I'm going to be teaching next year. And I have that opportunity, and I'm really excited for it. But it just continued to blow me away that I had the majority of my students looking at me seriously, saying that I was making something out of nothing because racism doesn't exist anymore. And I tried to keep showing them that that's not the case. When the news broke about the Southern school whose students were holding their first integrated prom in 2013, I made sure to bring in something about that to talk about it. And that was a little disconnected from the other discussions I had been trying to have with them about race. Um, when the Harlem Shake videos were really, really big, I tried to lead a discussion with them about why certain members of certain communities were finding those videos to be really offensive, and it just wasn't registering with them because I think they were so closed off into their little bubbles, into their little worlds, and they weren't really open to other perspectives, which I think is ultimately their loss. And it was really strange for me as a white teacher with a room full of white students, or predominantly white students, to be able to sit down and say, like, hey, let's talk about race, because it's that thing that we were talking about. I don't know that they really bought it from me. And that's something I'm really looking forward to at the school that I'm going to be working at, is that there are those opportunities for students who have vastly different backgrounds and experiences. I'd love to see what they can bring to the table without tokenizing them, but really putting things into perspective and having those other voices and ideas present, I think is really, really going to be a great learning tool, not only for my students, but for me as well. So I was just thinking about where I was this year, and like Anna, I feel guilty about how I handled some of the things that came up, but I didn't have a lot of support for those conversations. But I think taking this class has really given me more ideas, and at least I have some resources to know where to look if there are teachers who aren't going to be as willing to talk about these things with me, because I'm just learning. So I don't know. I'm getting ready to start the reading for tomorrow. So we'll see how that goes and how that ties in. I have a feeling a lot of what we were starting to talk about today, what I have to talk about in this video, really will tie in to what was happening, or what will be happening in class tomorrow. So much babbling. Sorry. It's just so many things keep popping into my head, and it's that situation where I have more questions and no answers, and I'm just trying to get there. So thanks for suffering through almost 9 minutes. Sorry.